Today, I am going to talk to you about something that is very useful. It can be very challenging, but it's stuff that we should know, and that is phrasal verbs. That's coming up. So today's lesson, I want to focus on phrasal verbs. And as I said, this is something that's very important because we use phrasal verbs all the time. It can be very useful to use these when you're having a conversation or even writing a message to your friend. But they can be very challenging as well because we have that verb as well as that preposition at the end, which can really confuse some people. So I'm not going to just throw out some random phrasal verbs and go over those with you. I want to try and make it a little easier and discuss phrasal verbs by category. I think that way, if you can relate these phrasal verbs to a specific category, it'll make it a little easier to understand and as well as remember. So today we are going to talk about this. Useful clothing phrasal verbs and phrasal verbs that you can use that relate to clothing and getting ready. And this is going to help you because we use clothes all the time, and it's important to know how to use these in the context of whether we're wearing clothes and how we're using clothes. So it can be very useful. Now, before we begin, I want to just say what's up in the chat. Let me know your name, where you're from. I love hearing from you guys. And even if you are watching this much later, I want to hear from you. Write your name. Tell me where you're from in the comments. We just want to hear from you guys. So what's up, Christiana, Yasira, Betsy, Junior, Alex, Kiera, Bassam, Mohammed. Welcome. Thank you guys for joining me today. Sorry if I missed some names. I will try to acknowledge as many people as I can. So what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about some useful clothing phrasal verbs, and then at the end, we are going to practice and using these phrasal verbs, and I have some questions for you. So before we jump into the actual phrasal verbs, one thing that I think many of you have asked when it comes to phrasal verbs is sometimes phrasal verbs, we can separate them, and sometimes we can't separate them. They may be separable or non-separable. So I want to take a moment and talk about when we can separate phrasal verbs and when we can't. Now, the one thing we really need to know is whether the verb is transitive or intransitive. Now, you may be asking, Wes, what the heck is that? What is transitive and intransitive verb? Well, basically, it really depends on whether the sentence has a direct object or there is no direct object. So you can't think of one verb, it's always transitive or it's always intransitive. Don't think about it that way, because some verbs, depending on the sentence, they may be transitive and they have an object, or they may be intransitive and they don't. So let's quickly look at this. And when we're talking about transitive phrasal verbs, okay? Transitive phrasal verbs means that there is a direct object. We can separate, which means that we may be able to separate them. This is not always the case, but when there is one or more objects, we may be able to separate them. Check out this example right here. Please take out the trash. Please take out the trash. The trash is our object. We can put that in between the verb and the preposition. Please take the trash out. Same meaning, both are correct. Now, this one right here, if we're talking about to get on something like transportation, we cannot. It's a transitive verb. There is an object, but we can't separate this one. We got on the plane. We cannot say we got the plane on. No. Okay, so this one right here, it is inseparable. We cannot separate the verb and the preposition. A little later on, I'm going to give you a useful tip about how you can remember these, so that the next time you're having a conversation, you're just going to be able to use it correctly, whether or not you are separating the verb and the preposition or whether you're not. So for transitive verbs, they may be separable. For intransitive verbs, there is no object. There is no direct object. That's what makes it intransitive. And when there is no direct objects, they are inseparable. Okay, so for example, Wes wakes up at 9 a.m. At 9 a.m., that is a prepositional phrase. That means that wakes up, we cannot separate it. Wes wakes at 9 a.m. up? No, 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 no. Okay? So remember, if it's intransitive, there is no object, so we cannot put anything between the verb and the preposition. So that is a little tip for you guys when it comes to learning and understanding these phrasal verbs, because I know it can be difficult. I know it can be very challenging. So let's talk a little bit about our phrasal verbs for today, all right? So the first phrasal verb that I have for you is this one right here, have on. When we're talking about clothes, we're talking about things that we have on. You can have something on. It is separable because we have that object. It means to wear an item of clothing on one person. You're wearing something, okay? For example, she has on a blue and gold dress. She has on a blue and gold dress. That image, that illustration right there, it can be separable, and we can take that object and put it between the verb and the preposition if we want. She has a blue and gold dress on, all right? I have a shirt on. We can separate it, but when we're saying have on, we're talking about just something that we're wearing, all right? So in the chat, you can tell it, what if I asked you, what do you have on right now? What do you have on? What clothes do you have on? I imagine most of you should be wearing clothes right now, but who knows? All right, so the next phrasal verb I have is this one, take in. Take something in. Again, it is we can separate it, all right? It's a transitive verb, so it is separable. And that just means to make clothes narrower, all right? We're going to make them smaller, we're going to make them narrower. And when you talk about taking something in, I want to give you the context, because often you're talking about, for men, maybe a suit or some kind of formal coat. And for women, it might be a dress. And you don't want to go out and buy another one because it's very expensive. So you might take it to a seamstress, you might take it to a tailor, and just have them take it in a little so that it fits better. So for example, we have our sentence there. The dress is a little too big. I'll have the seamstress take it in. All right, they're going to make it smaller. So to take something in is to make it smaller. You might be wondering, well, what if we're going to try to make something bigger? And in that case, we are going to let something out. Again, it is separable. You can let something out. And this just means to make the clothing wider or larger. Again, we use it in that same context. You're often talking about formal clothes because they're more expensive, and you're not going to buy just a new suit or maybe a new dress that's very expensive. So you might have them let it out to make it a little larger so that it fits better. And we can use it in this example sentence by saying, the dress is a little too small. I'll have the seamstress let it out. So if the dress is too big, they can take it in. If it's too small, then you can let it out. So the next phrasal verbs, the next set of phrasal verbs I have for you is, boom, to slip on. You can slip something on. It is separable. A lot of these are separable, so this is good. So you know that you can put the object in between the verb and the preposition. And I think many of them, they're separable because, again, we're talking about clothes. So often that clothing, that is our object right there. So when we slip something on, we're talking about the ability to take on or off quickly. We're taking something on, we're you actually, it should be you're putting something on, or you're taking it off quickly. So for example, I could say, just slip your shoes on and head out the door. Just slip them on and go. So you're slipping something on. A lot of times when you're talking about this, it's talking about shoes. You're referencing your shoes. Slip your shoes on, head out the door. Or I'm just going to slip my shoes on and walk out and get the mail. You're putting something on quickly. Oftentimes we're talking about shoes. Now, slip on is to put on quickly. We can also slip something off. It's separable, and that just means to remove an article of clothing easily and delicately, but mostly to do it easily. You slip something off. Again, it's common to talk about like your shoes or clothing if you want to get more relaxed. So I think when you're talking about, you're going to slip something on or slip something off, one context it's used in is you're doing this to be more relaxed. So for example, you could slip on your pajamas. You get more comfortable. Or you want to slip off your shoes because when you take your shoes off, you're at home, you're more comfortable. So that is one context in which we use slip on, slip off. And our example sentence, she slipped off her robe and jumped into the pool. You can slip it off. You can remove the article of clothing. So let's take a little intermission, and I want to give you a tip and talk to you about one way in which how to learn and use these phrasal verbs correctly. And this is a challenge because so many learners ask us about, how do we learn phrasal verbs? What is the best way to do it? And unfortunately, when it comes to phrasal verbs, there are no real set rules like, oh, you need to do this, or this is the rule to follow. A lot of it comes down to memorization. A lot of it comes down to exposure and practice. And I think one of the best ways to practice is to read and see how these phrasal verbs are used in context. The other best way to do it is to do what you are doing right now. You are watching a lesson about phrasal verbs. And even if you know some of these phrasal verbs, it's always good to review and see how it's used, because then you'll understand, well, maybe I can separate this phrasal verb. Maybe I can't. Because then the next time you're having a conversation, you're not going to stop and think about the grammar and be like, oh, is there an object? Can I separate it? Can I not? You just want to be able to say it naturally. You want to be able to say it quickly. And in order to do that, it's always good to practice, to read, to expose yourself to the language. And that is the best way that it'll start to click. And you'll start using these phrasal verbs correctly and naturally. So the best thing to do, again, reading is a great way. The other thing to do is to do what you're doing now and watch lessons. Watch different lessons on phrasal verbs. That is only going to help you. So let's continue with our phrasal verb list. Ready? The next phrasal verb I have for you is this one, come off. It is not separable. You cannot put an object between the verb and the preposition. And when you're talking about come off, it's basically the ability to detach or remove. So, for example, the ring wouldn't come off. If I have my ring and I'm saying, okay, the ring, it wouldn't come off. Often you would hear it in something is happening. Maybe you're watching TV and somebody says, it won't come off. It won't come off. And you can see this by the context of what's happening, what it is. Maybe you're talking about shoes or something. But if somebody says, it won't come off, they don't have the ability to remove this thing. So to come off, to have something come off, you can't remove it. You can't take it off. So a lot of times it's also used with rings too. If you're talking about, the ring won't come off, or it's difficult. It's very difficult. So that is come off. The next phrasal verb, zip up. Again, this is separable, and we're talking about to fasten an article of clothing that is using a zipper. And when you think of a zipper, I think most of the time we all think of jackets, okay? A jacket. You zip up a jacket. It's cold out, so I need to zip up my jacket. It's separable, so you can say, hey, zip your jacket up. Or if you're cold, zip up your jacket up. Either one, both mean the same, but to zip something up. Next is, with also another one using up, hang up. It is separable. I think many of you probably may be familiar with this one because we can take clothes, we hang clothes up. We put something on a hook or a hanger, we put it in our closet, and we hang it up. In the past tense, we could say she hung up her clothes as soon as she arrived at the hotel. You hang something up, or in the past, maybe you hung something up. Next, we have this one, to kick off. And again, if we're talking about kick off, we're talking about shoes because you are removing shoes quickly. And a lot of times, again, I think you're kicking off your shoes because you want to get comfortable, because you want to relax. So you could say, after the party, she kicked off her heels and gave a sigh of relief. It was a relief to take them off. She kicked them off because she wanted to be more comfortable. She wanted to relax. So if you're talking about, to kick off, we're talking about shoes and you want to relax. Many times I might say, if you're out and you're like, gosh, I just want to get home. I want to kick off my shoes and just relax and take it easy. And you want to kick off your shoes. So those are 9 useful phrasal verbs, but we are not done yet because I want to practice using some of these phrasal verbs and test your knowledge. And again, this is the best way to learn, is to actually practice and see if you can identify the verbs, if you can identify the preposition, and practice using these phrasal verbs so that the next time you're having a conversation, it comes to you naturally, it comes to you quickly. And especially if you're talking about clothing, you'll really be able to do it and understand this because you have watched this lesson. Now, we are going to do a practice right now, and I have some questions for you, but it's not just these phrasal verbs. I am going to test your knowledge on all of the clothing phrasal verbs we have done. And you may be wondering, wait, what are you talking about? Because before we did a clothing phrasal verbs lesson with 8 other clothing phrasal verbs, and I will link that lesson in the description. So if you have not seen that lesson, I highly recommend you go check it out because that is a lot of different phrasal verbs that between this lesson and last lesson, those are a lot of clothing phrasal verbs that you can practice and use, and it is very, very, very useful. So I have some questions for you guys, and if you are in the chat, I want you to write your answers in the chat. If you are watching this later on, I still interact with the lesson. Write your answers in the comments as we're going through these, so that way I know that you participated in the lesson. That is the best way to practice. So for the first 2 questions, all I want you to do is complete the sentence with the correct preposition. I'm not going to give you the list of prepositions. You just have to choose which one do you think would best complete the sentence. Are you ready? So your first question is this one right here. All right. This is a phrasal verb from the other lesson. So this is a formal event. So you really need to dress for the occasion. This is a formal event, so you really need to dress for the occasion. What preposition are we going to use to complete that sentence? Write it in the chat, and if you're watching this later, write it in the comments. Participate in the lesson. This is, after all, it is interactive English. So again, the key word there is formal. That's the key word, because if you're talking about a formal event, we would dress up for a formal event. To dress up is to put on formal clothing. This is a formal event, so you really need to dress up for the occasion. The next question I have is this one. Joanna likes to slip her pajamas as soon as she gets home. And that little illustration, it kind of looks a little like Joanna. Joanna likes to slip her pajamas as soon as she gets home. What do you guys think? What preposition are you going to use to correctly complete that sentence? All right. Joanna likes to slip her pajamas as soon as she gets home. All right. So the phrasal verbs that we talked about in this lesson, remember, we talked about slip on and we talked about slip off. So when you get home, you put on your pajamas. So we're talking about Joanna likes to slip on her pajamas as soon as she gets home. If you're talking about slipping off your pajamas, then you wouldn't be wearing any clothes. So slip on, that is the answer we were looking for. All right. The next two questions that I have for you, I want you to complete the sentence using the correct verb. Okay. I just tested you on the preposition. Now I want you to fill in the blank with the correct verb. So, for example, here's our first one. I love that. I love that image right there. When you go shopping, you should always on new clothes before buying them. What verb are we going to use to complete that sentence? When you go shopping, you should always on new clothes before buying them. All right, there are some keys to that, key words to that right there, which we'll talk about. So, excellent. I see a lot of great answers right now in the chat. So, we're talking about shopping. That's the key word, shopping. So, because when you go shopping, you should always try on new clothes before buying them. You want to try something on. You do this when you're shopping to see if it fits, to see if it's comfortable, and then you would buy it. I know maybe you could say put on. It'd be correct, and people would understand it. It just wouldn't be the correct context, because when you're talking about shopping, it's better to use try on to test it out to see if those clothes fit. All right, the next question right here. Last year, the dress was tight, so I had someone it out. Now that I lost some weight, I need them to it in. Which verb are we going to use to complete these sentences? Last year, the dress was tight, so I had someone it out. Now that I lost some weight, I need them to it in. What do you guys think? You guys are rocking this. Write your answers in the chat. Or again, if you're watching it later, write it in the comments. Don't be shy. We want to hear from all of you guys. All right, so what do you guys think? Which verbs are we going to use to complete these sentences? Last year, the dress was tight. Remember, that's the key word, tight. So I had someone it out. Now that I lost some weight, maybe it's a little loose. I need them to it in. All right, so the verbs that we were looking for. I see some good answers. All right, last year the dress was tight, so I had someone let it out. So if some clothes are tight, you want them to be wider and larger, you would let them out. Now that I lost some weight and the clothes are too big, I need them to take it in. You need to make the clothes narrower and take it in. And again, we're often talking about formal clothing, either for men, usually a suit, for women, a dress. You take clothes in or you let them out and make them larger, all right? So you guys rocked that practice. You did excellent, a great job. So again, this is very useful when talking about clothing. You should know these phrasal verbs. If you haven't checked out the other clothing phrasal verb lessons, I highly recommend you do so. And if you guys enjoyed this lesson, please hit that like button, and always we appreciate it if you would share this lesson with other friends, family members, anybody that you guys know who wants to practice and improve their English skills and help us spread the word. And as always, in the comments, write to us in the comments. We love hearing from you guys. Tell us a category of phrasal verbs maybe that you want to learn. What phrasal verbs would you like to practice and learn about? Because when we're talking about anything, we use specific phrasal verbs with that topic, with that category. So this is all about clothing. I hope you guys found this lesson useful and can go on to use these phrasal verbs the next time that you are talking about clothing. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time.